Welcome to the Buy to Let Property Podcast from Lifestyle Property People, where we discuss all things property and investing. I'm your host, Shiv, and in today's episode, we're trying something a little bit different. Every day, I receive quite a few questions about the process of investing in property, the state of the current property market, or even just how I started and scaled my own portfolio. So what we thought is that it would be a really great idea for us to start recording the answers that I give for anyone else that also has the same questions. So every fortnight, what we're going to do is that I'll be answering the top questions that I've been asked. And today's episode, we're kicking off with two really great questions, one from Himal and one from Sam. But before we begin, if you haven't already, make sure that you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode of the Buy to Let Property Podcast. And if you find value in today's episode, please leave us a review so together we can reach more people who want to create financial security for themselves and their families. All right, let's jump right in. A common sticking point for people is actually whether they have the time and the headspace to set up their buy-to-let investments whilst balancing a full-time job, family commitments, and everything else that life is throwing at them. And today, Himal is wondering, how much time do you really need to dedicate to getting your buy-to-let property up and running if you're working a full-time job? Really great question. The first thing to say is that there are so many steps involved in setting up a buy-to-let property. And I think so many people just think, oh, I'll go to the estate agent, I'll buy the house and I'll rent it. And that's the end of it. And, it's going to get done in 3 or 4 weeks' time. That's it. It's unfortunately just not that simple. The fact is, the process of setting up a buy-to-let investment can take you easily 8 to 12 months. It's a huge, long process. As well as that, you've got a lot of stakeholders involved. You've got obviously yourself and the seller of the property. You've got your solicitors, their solicitors, the estate agents. You've got the letting agents. You've got the mortgage advisor, the surveyor, the project manager, the insurance broker. There's so many people that need to be kept in the loop, as well as the lender, of course, who's going to lend you the money if you're going to go ahead with the mortgage. And it's really quite a difficult process to keep on track, and so many different things that could go wrong. So there is quite a lot of moving parts that you need to make sure that you're on top of. The first thing that you're going to do, of course, is try and figure out, well, what's the criteria of the properties that I'm looking for? What we always say is that they're large enough that they're going to attract the growth to the city, but they're small enough that they haven't yet had the growth. So there's a huge potential for that growth to come over the next 10 or so years. That's why we invest in those kind of places. We also rent these properties out to professional tenants, or professional families, I should say. And as a result, obviously what's useful is to have local amenities like shops and schools, parks, and leisure centres around the areas that we're looking to buy in as well. Once you've identified what property you want and what you're going to do with it, you're then going to set yourself a search on whether it's Rightmove, Zoopla, on the market. There's lots of different sites that you can use. You're also going to potentially call around your estate agents that you have in those areas and then say to them, hey, this is what I'm looking for. Now, it's important that you don't just get the email sent to your inbox and then go and view the properties. You've really got to start building a relationship with the estate agents. And that really involves a lot of kind of going up, meeting and greeting estate agents and getting them to get to know you. It can be a little bit awkward sometimes because obviously if they don't really know who you are, you're kind of walking in and it's a bit cold, like cold calling almost. But obviously, if you do it 2 or 3 or 4 times, eventually they get to start to know who you are. And what that means is that when a property comes up that matches your criteria, instead of you having to wait for it to come into your inbox, there could be a potential that they could actually just give you a call and say, hey, this one matches your criteria. Why don't you come and have a look at it? So once you've set up that whole the criteria and start building the relationships, you then need to go and actually view the properties. Now, if you don't live in the location that you're looking to view the properties in, that's going to be quite difficult because obviously it takes you 3.5 hours for me to drive up to Leeds, go and view the property and come back down again. So what is really useful is to have a local team. And if you don't have access to a local team, then you might have to employ somebody in the area that can go view the property. Of course, you also need to make sure that if you're employing somebody that they actually have the skills to be able to view the property correctly. And in the viewing, what you're looking for is any telltale signs of what's happening in this situation. Why is the vendor selling the property? Is it the reason that they've given, or is there actually a different reason? Are there tenants in the property? How much are they paying? Are there any issues with the property that we should be aware of? And of course, any refurbishment works required and how much that's going to cost. Once you've figured all of that out and you can actually make an offer, put an offer into the agents, you then have to negotiate that offer with the agents. If you've built that relationship up front, it's a lot easier to negotiate that price with the agents. And hopefully, once you've done, say, for example, 20 or 40 viewings, the more viewings you do, the easier it will get for you to identify which properties you're actually looking for. So you'll have to do less viewings to get the ones that you want. And then, so the more viewings you do, the more offers you can put in. And the more offers you can put in, the more likely that you are to get one of your offers accepted. So that's the principle of this. So you've got to do quite a lot of viewings to then end up with quite a lot of offers, to end up with maybe one or two of your offers actually getting accepted in the end. So let's say your offer does get accepted, you then have to instruct the purchasing team, and that's going to be the solicitor, the mortgage advisor, and the insurance broker at this stage. You're also going to then have to instruct the surveyor and the project manager as well, because you want to be doing some property checks as well. So first things first is that the mortgage advisor is going to put the mortgage application into the lender, and they're going to make sure that you can get a mortgage on that property. They'll send a valuer out to the property, and obviously you may have to meet the valuer at the property, open the door for them, walk them around the property, etc. So again, we've got to take these things into account in terms of the time that's taken to do those things. Once we've got the valuation and we've got the offer from the mortgage lender, which again could take itself easily 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks to get done, we can then start the legal process of doing the title searches and making sure that the inquiries are raised for the vendor to make sure that this property is a good property for you to buy from a legal perspective. At that point, it's also useful for us to send the project manager and the surveyor into the property to make sure that the property condition is correct and that you haven't missed anything when you went to view the property. And of course, once all of that whole process is done, this is the purchasing process, which we actually call the due diligence process. That can take itself, a good sort of 3, 4, 5 months sometimes. At the end of that process, liaising with lots of different people, you're then going to end up, insuring the property and then completing on the property. So you're going to end up owning the property. Once you've owned the property, we then have to refurbish the property. Of course, that's going to involve finding out what refurbishment works you've got to do to the property. Then you've got to go and create a schedule of works. Then you've got to go and find the builders, whether you do it on My Builder or local recommendations from Facebook groups and things like that. You've got to make sure that the builders that you find have a contract and that they're trustworthy, and most importantly, that they can actually start on time as well. It's so unlikely these days with how busy builders are that you'll finish the project on a Friday and that you'll have to start the works on a Monday. And if you don't do that, then obviously you're going to have some wasted time and you're going to be paying mortgage in that meantime. So you really want to get this done as quickly as possible. Once you refurbish the property, obviously every week you need to go and check on the builder's work because they're going to be asking for payment on a weekly basis and to make sure that they've done the work that they say they're going to do. And it's up to the standard that you want them to be doing those works too. At the end, you want to do a quality assurance checklist to make sure that everything's working and that there hasn't been anything that's been missed off the schedule. And obviously, once all that is done, then we can hand it over to the letting agent to go and tenant the property. Now, if you go and do this yourself, I wouldn't recommend it. It's a very long and winded process and there's lots of things that can go wrong. But if you use a local vetted management company, then they can do the lettings for you. Now, of course, what they're going to do is they're going to check it from a safety perspective. They're going to check it from a landlord perspective to make sure that it's they protect your interest as a landlord to make sure there aren't anything that a tenant can sue you, for example. So they're going to try and do all of that, but ultimately it is your responsibility to do all of that. And then once they've done that, they'll market the property, they'll find a tenant for it, they'll do viewings of that property, and then they'll find the tenant that wants to move in, get an application in, vet that tenant. Vetting is really, really important now. It's going to get even more important in the future. And then once they've vetted that tenant, then obviously the tenant can move in. As well as that entire process that I've just said over there, there's also a whole bunch of other stuff to do, like, for example, phoning up the utilities companies, phoning up the council to tell them that the old owner has left and that you're now the new owner. Obviously, when they move to the tenants move in, we've got to do that whole process again. So there's all of these things, and you guys will know if you've spent any time on the phone to British Gas or E.ON, it takes you hours to get through to that as well. So the answer to the question is that there's lots of time involved with all the way through the process. If we think about the initial stages where we've got to actually build a relationship with the agents, go and view the properties, there's time involved in the area. And if you don't live in the area, then that's going to be near enough impossible for you to do. And then once you go through the purchasing process, then you can sort of sit back a little bit. Now, there's a lot of time involved there, but you don't need to be in the area. So obviously the travel time is cut down massively. And then once we've got to the refurb, then you need to be back in the area because you need to be checking the refurbs on a weekly basis. And then obviously with the rental, if you hire a management company, you then don't need to be in the area for that. So I'd say in all, it's, like I said, 8 to 10 month process. You probably do need to be quite involved, especially if you're trying to buy multiple properties, and 2, if you want to do it right and make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And that's obviously just the setup part. Once you set it up, you then need to manage it. And from a management perspective, I'd say if you've got a good management agent on board, there's still going to be some effort required to manage the property on a monthly basis. I'd probably say between half an hour and an hour. It's not a huge amount of time, but ultimately you still need to make sure that the rent's getting paid, it's the correct amount of rent, that the certificates are all up to date, and make sure that you're taking care of any maintenance issues that the tenants have raised. So all of these things can take, 30 minutes to 60 minutes on a monthly basis. I'd say probably in a year, about 10 hours plus a little bit, let's say 2 hours extra for doing the accounts at the end of the year as well. So there is some time involved on an ongoing basis, as well as the time involved to set it up. The time involved to set it up is quite intensive, and there's quite a lot to do. And like I said, there's quite a lot of stakeholders to keep happy as well. So that's the answer to that question. I hope that's helped. I think in terms of doing it on the side of a full-time job, really, the answer is you can do it. But what you will have to do is you will have to sacrifice your evenings and your weekends to do it. And for a lot of people, they just don't want to do it, or they can't do it because they've got family to keep up to date with. And, on the weekends, like, you might think to yourself, after working a whole week from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. every single day, Monday to Friday, on a Saturday, you don't want to wake up at 6 o'clock and drive up to Leeds so that you can go and look at properties. What you'd rather do is probably say, you know what, I want to go for a meal with my family or drinks with my friends or something like that. So for a lot of people, it is possible to do this on the side of their jobs, but ultimately it comes down to what do you value more? Do you value time with your friends or, traveling up the M1? So that's the answer to that question. Hope that's been useful. The second question in today's episode comes from Sam, who wants to know how much money does he actually need to get his first buy-to-let property off the ground? So firstly, I know that this is a big decision, and knowing that the costs up front can make the whole process much less daunting. So let's see if we can break down the numbers for you. So first things first is, let's say we've got a purchase price of about £150,000. In the areas that we invest in Leeds and Sheffield, that's the kind of price that they are. So £150,000 purchase price. If we're going to buy in with a mortgage, usually we tend to get a 75% mortgage. So that's going to be £112,500 that's provided by the lender, by the mortgage lender that's going to be lending us the money. So we will have to put in the deposit, which is the 25%. We'll have to put in £37,500 worth of deposit money. On top of that, we're going to have to put in the legal fees, which typically tend to add up to between £1,500 and £2,000, depending on whether you're buying in your personal name or buying in a limited company. If you buy in a limited company, it's closer to the £2,000 mark. We're then also going to have to pay the mortgage advisor, who is usually going to be taking a fee of about £500 to organise the mortgage for you. And we're going to be paying the surveyor, who's going to be taking a fee of about £500 again to do the survey for you. Also, these days, if you own your own property already and you're going to be buying another property, a second property, a buy-to-let property, for example, then you are going to have to pay an additional stamp duty. And the additional stamp duty is 3% of the purchase price. So 3% of £150,000 is £4,500. On top of that, there could be some licensing costs that you've got to pay. So depending on the area that you live in and the borough that you have, the city that you live in, there could be licensing in that particular area. Now, the licensing costs vary depending on the city, but it could be, let's say, about £1,000 for a 5-year license, and you'll have to renew that every 5 years or so. On top of that, of course, every property that you buy is going to require some element of refurbishment works. Some people like to buy a property that has, very little refurbishment works required, because it means they can get the property rented really quickly. On the other hand, some people like to buy a property that is run down, that needs a lot of work, because then they have the security of knowing that they've done all the major things in the property, so there aren't going to be any problems for quite some time. So in this example, I'm going to include an £18,000 cost for refurbishment and project management as well, because we like to use a project manager, because refurbishing your own properties is no fun at all, or managing the refurb, I should say, is no fun. And then the final thing that you want to add on top of all of this is a lettings fee. So when you go to let your property, there's going to be this one-off letting fee that you have to pay to tenant the property. And the lettings fee is typically in the region of like 1 month's rent. So if a month's rent in this example is £850, we're going to say the lettings fee is £850 as well. So that means that the funds required, so that's the deposit, the legal fees, the mortgage fees, the survey fees, stamp duty, licensing, refurbishment, and lettings, everything but the mortgage itself, all of those fees together add up to £63,850, 63,850. And then, of course, if you add the mortgage in, then you're looking at a total investment, everything all in, of £176,350. So we're looking at, in terms of money from your own pocket, about £65,000 or so. Then, of course, on the other side, that's the cost to sort of set it up. But then let's understand what it's going to yield us on a monthly basis or an annual basis, let's say. So the gross rent on a monthly basis is going to be about £850. So that's going to give us annually £10,200 worth of rent. Now, of course, every year that gross rent is going to continue to increase, but let's just do this for year one. The mortgage interest at the moment is quite high. It is going to come down over the next year, but at the moment we're looking at about 5% mortgage interest, which gives us a mortgage interest cost of £5,625 a year. So from the £10,000 about 5 grand of it, about half of it is the mortgage interest cost. Then you've got two other things: ongoing management, which is usually about 10 to 12%, and you've got buildings insurance, which is usually about £250. If you take those two costs off themselves, then you get a cash flow, or also known as rental profit, annual rental profit of just over £3,000 a year. So £3,000 a year is the rental profit that you'll make on this property. And that gives us a gross yield of 6.8%, which most people who invest in anything will know that 6.8% is a pretty decent gross yield. On top of that, though, you also get a capital growth of between 5 and 10%, somewhere in that kind of region. So if you add the gross yield and the capital growth together, 6.8 plus 5, you get what we call double-digit returns. That's the kind of returns that you're looking to make on these kind of properties. And of course, what's going to happen over time is that the gross rent is going to increase, but also the property price is going to increase. So hopefully that answers your question of the kind of funds that you need in order to get set up with this process. And that's all well and good as long as you are doing this yourself. Of course, we've also talked about earlier the fact that, actually it's going to take quite a lot of time to do this yourself, and you may not be in a position to do it yourself. So in that case, you're going to have to use an end-to-end service providers like ourselves do the whole end-to-end process for you. Now, I have said to you, this end-to-end process can take us between 8 to 12 months. It's like a year-long process. So how much are we going to take as a fee? It's in the region of between £12,000 and £13,000, depending on the number of properties that you buy. But ultimately, over the space of the next 10 years, you're going to create about £250,000, £300,000 worth of value. And we're going to take a small percentage of that overall value that we're going to help you to create. So that's the total fees included. You need about £60,000 to £65,000 as the funds required, and then about another £10,000 to £12,000 for our fee on top of that. Hope that helps. So there we have it. Thanks for tuning in to the Buy to Let Property Podcast. If you have any questions that you want answering, head on down to the description below and click the link to submit your own questions. And if you enjoyed today's episode and you want more expert tips on property investing, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. The support that you give us helps us reach more listeners just like you. Stay tuned for our next episode. And remember, the best time to invest in property was 20 years ago. The next best time to invest in property is right now. See you next time. Bye-bye.